Swedish investigators' early findings into the Nord Stream pipeline explosions have only, quote, strengthened the suspicions of gross sabotage. Investigators say evidence of detonations were found. However, a suspect has not yet been identified. Meanwhile, Russian officials have claimed they were informed through diplomatic channels that there are no plans to include Moscow in the investigation. All right, so obviously there have been a lot of people speculating over the course of the last week or so about who's responsible. And to the extent that there is evidence that indicates things one way or another, the Occam's razor of it all does seem to point in the direction of the U.S. What do you make of this?
I don't think that. I think the Occam's razor points to Russia.
Why is that?
Look, I know I have no illusions about the things the U.S. has done to interfere illicitly in other countries. We have a long history of that, absolutely. It would be, I'm not saying it's impossible. I don't think it's a conspiracy theory. I absolutely understand why people think it might be the U.S. I think it might be the U.S. I have listened to what our officials have said that would give every indication that could be. And yes, we have sounded happy to capitalize on this setback for the Russia to Germany energy project. That said, I think it would be nuts if we blew up their pipeline, our ally, Germany. That would be an act of sabotage that I would, at this stage of geopolitics, put past U.S. officials.
What's Germany going to do? What are any of them? The whole point of the unipolar
it's nearly
state,
an act of
American
war.
Hegemony, is that nobody can really do anything to us, and so we act with impunity all across the globe.
Right, we do that in Latin America. We do that in the Middle East. We don't do it to Germany.
Okay, so that's my point. What's incredible to you is that we might do it.
Yes.
To a European power,
yes.
like a big global power,
yes.
as opposed to, I don't know, Venezuela,
yes.
Cuba,
that is exactly
or even
what
Russia, another global power, I might add.
Okay, but so doing this is wild. Okay, and we all are agreeing this was an act of deliberate sabotage. That's what everybody seems to be saying. For anyone to have done this is pretty out there, outside the bounds of like what makes sense for state actors to do. The state actor on the global in the world, in the stage right now that is doing things that are outside the bounds of like rational what should be done is Russia. This is very much in keeping with Putin's sudden decision to have this annexation referendum in Ukraine, like in the midst of a war that is suddenly going bad for him. It's shaking the table a little bit. It's overthrowing the chessboard. Does it make a lot of sense for them? No, but that they are the actor who are doing things that don't totally make sense.
Okay, so what do you make then of this famous clip that's now circulated all over the place of Joe Biden giving this speech, standing next to, I don't remember what German official, rather, whether it was a PM or who was it, but standing next to some high-ranking German diplomatic official and saying, there are ways. There are ways to stop the pipeline if it comes to that. There are ways.
There will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
How will you do that exactly, since the project and control of the project is within Germany's control?
We will, I promise you, we'll be able to do it.
There's also this Condoleezza Rice clip that people were circulating, talking about the strategic necessity of disrupting oil flow from Russia. All of this evidence. There was the Polish politician who's married to an American State Department official who tweeted out immediately after the the bombing, the disruption was announced. Thank you, USA. All of that you think is coincidence?
I mean, there's no obvious explanation for why this occurred. There's no that's what it's got to be. So I'm just trying to look like who is doing things that make this would be. I'm not putting it past us. I'm not saying it can't be us.
Yeah.
It would still be pretty wild.
Look, I appreciate your skepticism. I had the questions too, so I asked Gray Zone journalist and frequent guest of Rising, Aaron Mate, about these theories on today's episode of Bad Faith Podcast, actually. And let's run a clip that shows the evidence and how it panned out in his view.
If you look at the map of where the explosions were, they're a few hundred miles away, at least, from Russia. They're not on the Russian area of the pipeline. They're near the waters of Denmark. And it's a lot harder for Russian naval operatives to access the waters of Denmark, off of Denmark, than it is to access the waters off of Russia. So that's a great point. And yeah, they invested billions of dollars in this, and this was a very lucrative project for Russia, and also a project that would, I think, help Russia, and that again, if they have closer ties via energy to the rest of Europe, it makes it more difficult to impose sanctions on Russia and to engage in conflict with Russia. So why Russia would want to blow up this pipeline, which previously was recognized as its main form of leverage, makes no sense, especially when everybody knows that Germany has always had cold feet about this Ukraine proxy war.
All right, so what do you make of that?
So I appreciate Aaron's perspective. Love the guy. We've had him on had him on the show a lot. But so Putin's interest and Russia's interests are not necessarily the same thing. Yes, of course it's better for Russia to be part of the European community and to transport gas vis-a-vis this pipeline to Germany. But he's saying, like, Russia, it would be better for Russia if they had like closer relations to European other European powers, and this pipeline was supposed to help facilitate that. Yeah, but you know what else like put their reputation with the rest of Europe in danger? When they freaking invaded Ukraine. And by they, I mean Vladimir Putin. So you can't just say like, well, yeah, if they were doing things that made sense, they wouldn't have done that. Well, if they're doing things that made sense, they wouldn't be losing a war against Ukraine that is isolating the rest of Europe from them.
The whole point is, and this is the same conversation we just had with respect to OPEC and Saudi Arabia. The whole point is that there are very bad people who do things that we don't agree with from an ethical perspective, but we kowtow and we do business with them because at the end of the day, oil is king. It's the same situation for Germany. And the reason why Biden made those statements back in January or whatever it was before the conflict started, when he acknowledged the strategic implications of Nord Stream 2 and standing next to a German official said, there are ways, the question basically, if I recall it correctly, pointed out that it is in Germany's interest to be able to access this pipeline. It is in Germany's interest and Europe's interest to be able to have more access to fuel, especially heading into winter when fuel costs are high. We talked a couple of weeks ago about how Liz Truss and Britain have a cap on oil costs because they understand what a political bomb it is for people in their country to have to pay these incredibly high gas prices as a consequence of this ongoing conflict in Ukraine. And we have had reporting after reporting after reporting about how much this conflict was instigated at the hand of U.S. State Department officials, and not necessarily something that the allies in Europe necessarily want to be a part of. It's not necessarily as geopolitically strategic for them to do the same thing. So that for all of those reasons, I don't understand why it could clearly be the case that Germany is being strong-armed by the United States into, ideologically, yes, no one wants the invasion of Russia. But at the end of the day, just like we keep doing business with Saudi Arabia, despite them killing American journalists and instigating a war in Yemen and causing famine and destruction, they would happily continue doing, or not happily, begrudgingly continue doing business with Russia, because otherwise their people freeze to death or have to pay sky-high oil prices. It's the same thing.
I know, but I'm not saying that's impossible. That is perfectly plausible. But then we get it. I just don't want to ever get into this weird place where we're like, yeah, the U.S. is doing all these nefarious things. They're so bad, which is true. But that is true of so many governments. And there's the government, there's the state actor, there's the actual political figure, and there's what the state apparatus wants, and there's what the actual people want, and these are different interests. Governments we are not alone in doing dumb, counterproductive, destructive, violent things.
As Trump said, and there's a lot of murderers everywhere.
Right. So I'm saying we should probably look with some suspicion. There should probably be a cloud of nefarious intent on the nation that's invading the other nation right now.
Look, it's completely possible that it's a false flag that Russia, went to the other end of the pipeline to blow up the bit that wasn't there.
Of course they're going to blow.
All of that is possible, but it's also true, if you watch the full clip and you listen to the full episode, there's a discussion of, the American military testing charges, or NATO troops testing charges in the water nearby where the explosion happened, around the time of the explosion happening. There's just so much evidence that is out there that casts suspicion on the United States. And for the United States not to have addressed any of that, despite there being so much news coverage over all of these moments that really come off as admissions from Condoleezza Rice, from Joe Biden himself, from all these figures who would be in the know. It's telling at the very least that they don't seem to feel the need to address that level of discourse, or even make a denial. I don't know. We'll continue to following it. Obviously, I don't know what happened. You don't know what happened.
Nope.
The Swedish investigators don't know what happened, except for that we know it was sabotage and not an oopsie daisy.
Not an oopsie daisy. Missed Colonel Mustard in the conservatory with the candlestick, with the submarine, the submarine torpedoes. All right, more Rising right after this. Stay with us.